Australia has an endless super fence, but did you know it wasn't built to protect borders or keep people out? The secret lies in a tiny creature no one would expect. In 1859, at Barwon Park in Victoria, an English gentleman named Thomas Austin received 24 rabbits as a Christmas gift. He released them into the wild, simply hoping to have more animals to hunt for fun. In fact, Europeans had brought rabbits to Australia many times since 1788. But they had never spread out of control. The difference was in Austin's batch of rabbits, according to genetic studies from Cambridge University. These were wild rabbits from southwest England with superior adaptability. When they encountered Australia's vast open spaces, few natural predators, endless grasslands, and favorable climate, they became the spark for an ecological disaster. Within just a few decades, the rabbit population spread at an average rate of nearly 100 kilometers per year, and after about 50 years, they had covered almost the entire continent, a record never seen before. 6 years later, Austin himself wrote that he had hunted over 20,000 rabbits on his own land, but the population didn't seem to go down at all. Then things got worse. The rabbits were destroying the land, grasslands were stripped bare, shrubs couldn't regrow, and many native species began to die off from lack of food. Farmers suffered huge losses, with annual agricultural damage estimated at 200 to 217 million Australian dollars, or about 130 to 150 million US dollars. People became desperate to deal with the rabbits. They tried everything: hunting, trapping, poisoning, even digging giant pits to trap entire groups. But it was like a drop in the ocean. If even one pair of rabbits survived, they would quickly multiply again. In desperation, the New South Wales government even offered a huge reward, $2 million US dollars, to anyone who could find a permanent solution to control the rabbits. Sadly, no one ever claimed the prize. With no effective weapon in sight, the government had to consider physical barriers. In 1901, the first fences were built to separate fertile farmland in Victoria, New South Wales, and Queensland from the semi-arid regions where rabbits kept pouring in. The goal was no longer to wipe them out, but at least to stop their advance. The project started near 80 Mile Beach in the north and stretched all the way down to Esperance in the south, with an initial length of 1,833 kilometers. To build this steel wall across the continent, the government mobilized over 120 workers along with 350 camels, 210 horses, and 41 donkeys to transport materials through desert dust storms and water shortages. Boundary riders. The patrol workers had to manage 160 kilometers of fence, each traveling by bicycle, then by camel. They even tried using cars, but gave up quickly as tires kept blowing out in the heat and rough terrain. Each kilometer of fence cost about 167 pounds at the time, making it one of the most expensive projects in the state's history. However, the limitations were obvious. Just one break in the fence could undo years of hard work, so constant maintenance was needed to keep it standing. And in some parts of South Australia, the fence wasn't just a barrier, it was a dividing line between two worlds. Even steel and wood deeply buried in the ground couldn't make a perfect wall. Rabbits still dug underneath, sometimes even jumped over. And within a few years, they were found on the other side. The government had to build fence number 2, 1,166 kilometers long, and fence number 3, 257 kilometers long, turning the system into a massive barrier over 3,250 kilometers. To put that in perspective, it's about the same as driving from New York to Miami in the United States, or from Paris to Rome in Europe. Although the fences didn't wipe out the rabbits, they slowed the invasion long enough for Western Australia's agriculture to survive and expand. They saved tens of millions of dollars in crop and pasture losses and gave farmers a sense of control they hadn't had in decades. Surprisingly, the fences also helped keep out emus, wild dingoes, wild pigs, and kangaroos from the crops. But just 2 decades later, in 1932, the Wheat Belt region faced a new invader. Tens of thousands of emus flocked in, destroying wheat fields and even crossing the rabbit-proof fences. The government sent in soldiers to deal with them. But after a few weeks, the campaign ended in a disastrous failure. At first, the rabbit-proof fences were only meant to hold back small rodents, but later they were reinforced to stop emus, dingoes, wild pigs, and kangaroos as well. By the 1930s, Queensland alone had built tens of thousands of kilometers of dingo-proof fencing. In 1958, separate fence sections in several states were joined together to form the super fence, known as the dog fence, the largest sheep protection barrier in Australia. Today, the dog fence still stretches about 5,300 kilometers, running from Queensland through New South Wales and ending at the Great Australian Bight in South Australia. That's 16 times longer than the Thames River in London, and about as far as driving from New York to Los Angeles. It's the longest continuous fence in the world, a symbol of humanity's desperate but determined effort to battle the wild. But the dog fence isn't just a barrier, it's like a scar across the continent, splitting Australia into two very different worlds. In the north and west, where dingoes still roam, they keep rabbits, foxes, and feral cats in check, maintaining ecosystem balance. In the south and east, where dingoes have been wiped out, small predators have exploded in numbers, native marsupials have declined, and the landscape has changed dramatically. Satellite images show a stunning contrast. One side is bare, wind-blown sand. The other is thick with shrubs and sand dunes. Scientists call this the world's largest outdoor ecological experiment because it allows direct observation of how a top predator affects the entire natural system. Along with its benefits, the dog fence has left ecological scars. Many emus, kangaroos, and even dingoes are blocked during their migrations, trapped and dying of thirst along the fence. Ecologists describe it as a fence-lined graveyard where hundreds of kilometers are marked by sun-bleached bones. Without dingoes, kangaroo populations inside the fence have exploded, overgrazing the grasslands and depleting the soil. Phosphorus, carbon, and nitrogen levels have dropped, plants struggle to recover, and the nutrient cycle is broken. There's also a huge economic burden. Every year, the government spends about $1 million on patrols, restringing wire, and repairing electric fences. In 2019, New South Wales alone spent another $25 million to patch a 32-kilometer breach after thousands of sheep were attacked by dingoes, causing millions in losses. Behind these numbers are the fence runners, lonely men driving hundreds of kilometers through the desert day after day, tightening wires and checking gates, a silent job, but the last line of defense for the sheep industry. The dog fence has clearly been a success. It protects millions of sheep and helps Australia remain a world leader in wool production. But at the same time, it's also an accidental experiment, with nature one side, with dingoes one side without. Australia's dog fence isn't the only fence in the world built to manage nature. In Africa, Namibia has the veterinary red line, a huge fence system to keep disease-carrying wildlife from mixing with livestock. This protects the meat export industry, but also cuts off ancient migration routes for elephants and antelope, causing many populations to decline. In Botswana in the early 2000s, a series of veterinary fences caused the Makgatikgati zebra herds to vanish from their traditional wetland migration routes. Only in 2004, when the fences were removed, did the zebras return in what's now seen as one of Africa's most spectacular wildlife recoveries. Further away in the United States, the border fence with Mexico doesn't just stop migrants, it's also an unintended ecological barrier. It splits the habitats of jaguars, gray wolves, desert lynx, and many reptiles, disrupting their movement and breeding. Conservationists call it the invisible wall of extinction for North American wildlife. These examples show that every fence comes with a price. They may protect economies or security, but they also break up natural connections that have existed for thousands of years. The dog fence in Australia, the veterinary fences in Namibia, the United States-Mexico border, or Botswana's zebra story all remind us a line of barbed wire can change the fate of an entire ecosystem. Back in Australia, home to some of the world's longest fences, after nearly a century relying on megastructures like the rabbit-proof fence and dog fence, farmers have started to realize that a wall stretching thousands of kilometers isn't always the answer. Since the 2010s, Queensland has tried a new approach called cluster fencing. Instead of a great steel wall across the continent, multiple farms join together, pooling funds to build fences around a shared area ranging from several hundred to several thousand square kilometers. This is the basis of the cluster fencing program, supported by the Queensland government, allowing livestock producers to create agricultural fortresses that keeps sheep safe from wild dogs, kangaroos, and wild pigs while the wilderness outside remains untouched. The results of this model became clear quickly. Within just a few years, many clusters saw their sheep numbers double or triple, with lamb survival rates reaching 70 to 90% instead of just 30 to 40% as before. Abandoned grasslands, were brought back into production, wool output recovered, and hundreds of new jobs were created in rural communities. According to official reports, by 2023, Queensland had over 9,000 kilometers of cluster fencing protecting more than 22 million hectares of grassland, an area the size of the entire United Kingdom. The economic benefits were so clear that many clusters broke even within just 3 or 4 years of operation. However, just like the dog fence before, these new fences also create harsh ecological boundaries. Inside, sheep graze safely on green fields. Outside, kangaroos and emus still crowd around, some getting stuck and dying of thirst or becoming prey for predators. What makes this model interesting is the question it raises: is this really a more flexible and effective solution for agriculture? Or is it just a smaller version of the same old mistake, building walls against nature, instead of finding ways to live with it? But Australia didn't stop at traditional fences like the rabbit-proof fence, dog fence, or cluster fencing. The next step, which surprised even the world and Australians themselves, is the virtual fence. Simply put, instead of stretching barbed wire across the desert, farmers now equip their livestock with solar-powered GPS collars. When cows or sheep approach the invisible boundary, the device emits a sound, and if they keep going, a mild electric pulse makes them stop. Experiments at Ellenbank Smart Farm in Victoria showed that herds respected the boundaries 97 to 99% of the time. Pastures were managed more efficiently, and maintenance costs were much lower than with hard fences. This technology is also being used for road safety. In New South Wales, an 8.6-kilometer virtual fence with flashing lights and sound signals helped cut kangaroo car collisions by 90% in just 8 months. Globally, Norway stands out with over 150,000 smart collars from no fence, sold to more than 8,000 farms by 2025, showing the technology's growing appeal. However, virtual fences are still controversial. GPS can be off by 5 to 10 meters in rough terrain, giving animals false warnings, and even though the electric pulse doesn't injure them, it raises animal welfare concerns. That's why Australia is developing national guidelines expected in 2025 to ensure the technology is both effective and humane. Meanwhile, the world is also experimenting with other forms of virtual fences. Since 2022, Australia has installed roadside posts with green lights and sound to steer kangaroos away from cars without blocking migration. Canada keeps building hundreds of kilometers of roadside fencing, while Botswana has taken the opposite approach, removing veterinary fences since 2004 to reopen zebra migration routes. And within just a few rainy seasons, tens of thousands of animals return to the Makgadikgadi Plains. As we've seen from the start of this documentary, Australia has tried every kind of fence, from steel walls to cluster fences around farms, and now to invisible GPS and AI boundaries. But in the end, no matter how many kilometers of fence we build or how far technology advances, the real question is, do we want to keep building walls against nature or learn to live with it? This isn't just a lesson for Australia, but for the whole world. From the United States-Mexico border blocking jaguars, to Namibia's veterinary red line splitting antelope herds, or Canada's roadside fences breaking up ancient caribou migrations, everywhere we see human lines drawn across the land. In some places like Botswana, removing fences has worked wonders. Tens of thousands of zebras returned to their ancient plains after just a few rainy seasons. So the message here isn't about building more walls, but about looking back. Every fence we put up might save crops today, but could also break nature's rhythms forever. And in a world facing climate change and biodiversity loss, maybe the wisest solution isn't separation, but coexistence. From the rabbit nightmare of 1859 to thousands of kilometers of steel walls, to farm cluster fences, and now invisible GPS barriers, Australia's journey shows that people have tried everything to deal with nature. Sometimes they succeeded, sometimes they failed spectacularly, like the Great Emu War. What do you think? If it were up to you, Would you build walls or take them down? Leave a comment below so we can discuss together. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our latest videos.